Hello again. I think we have a special treat for you here, in part because this is one of the rare events where you will actually get to ask some questions of your own. To my immediate left is Scott Beardsley, who is the Dean at UVA, Darden School of Business. And next to him is Jake Cohen, who's Senior Associate Dean of Undergraduate and Master's Programs at MIT Sloan. And then next to him on the left, who was limping in because of a little accident that he had, Andrew Ainsley, who is the Dean at Rochester's Simon Business School. Both Jake and Andrew also have spent a good deal of time at other institutions running the MBA programs at those schools, Andrew at UCLA and Jake at NCOT. So we have a really good perspective of the business school landscape. I want to start with a question that I think a lot of people ask when they first start thinking about business school. Why is it so expensive? Now, Scott, when you graduated from MIT with your MBA in 1989, do you recall how much it cost?
I don't remember exactly how much it cost, but I remember how much in debt I was.
Even then?
Even then, if I added my undergraduate debt and my debt from Sloan, it was around $80,000 that I was in debt at the time, which, you know, adjusted for inflation was a substantial amount. I remember getting my signing bonus from McKinsey and paying off my highest interest loan, which was about 12 or 13% at the time.
Wow.
And so I know the issue of affordability is top of mind, and I have a great amount of sympathy for it because I was one of those kids. And so one of my objectives at Darden is to make it cheaper after, you know, scholarships rather than more expensive. It is expensive, but the return on investment is still very high.
Why is it so expensive? Jake?
I think, yeah, I agree, first of all, that it's expensive. I think it's still a very good opportunity for people to consider MBA programs. And I think it's very expensive because of the fact that we have high costs. So to attract the best faculty to schools that have opportunities outside of academia, to have the facilities and the labs we want to have, to offer the students the best resources is quite expensive. Outside, we were talking about the location. Location in the heart of Kendall Square is quite expensive too. So truthfully, the increases in tuition, and I'm an immigrant, and I understand that tuition is very high, and I too try to do everything we can to keep it as low as possible. But again, it is expensive because we try to make sure to cover the costs. It's not that we generate any profits off this. It's a nonprofit organization. So as costs go up, we need to keep tuition in check.
Now, Andrew, you've done actually some work on the ROI.
That's right.
Because I know I've published some of that work.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the return on investment given the cost. And actually, before we even go there, I should just mention this, because I think this is an important point, and Scott, you alluded to it. There is a sticker price, and then there's a discounted price. Mm-hmm. And the discounted price comes by virtue of fellowships and scholarships, which are fairly considerable in the business school space. Yeah. And in fact, there's been an arms race among the schools to offer more generous scholarships and make sure that the most talented people get into business school and they can go even if they can't afford the sticker price. So that's an important point to make. But what is the ROI?
Well, I think it's enormous. And in fact, I was going to be a little flippant and answer your question, why is it so expensive, and say, because it's worth it. So, you know, when I wrote that article for you a few years ago, one of the things I talked about is there's a really interesting sort of sorting mechanism and a relationship between where a school is ranked and what its price is. There's also a relationship between where a school is ranked and what the incoming salary is, and a relationship between where you're ranked and what the exit salary is. And all three are correlated in a way where wherever it is that you end up going in, you're going to basically see a huge return on investment between the salary when you enter and the salary when you exit. And the price is going to be set according to where you are in that graduation. So your school's a little more expensive than mine, but your salary's a lot higher than mine, and that ranking mechanism sort of shows through the system. So I think it's a tremendous value wherever you are in the system. And of course, you pointed out the scholarships. I don't think people take enough attention to the fact that many students don't pay anything near the sticker price.
Right.
That's right.
And the payback period is usually 4 years without a scholarship. At least that's what the public data shows.
Yeah, that's right.
And a lot of times we look at the value or the ROI on the basis of starting salary, and really, that's really not the best way to look at it, right?
I would agree with that. I mean, I think, first of all, a lot of students actually get scholarships that are very substantial. So, for example, at University of Virginia, we have the Thomas Jefferson Fellowship. People that compete for that, if you win it, you get tuition, room, and board all paid for. So your ROI in that case is infinite because it doesn't cost you anything. On the other hand, there are those who have to pay the full freight. They maybe have to borrow the full amount, which we will ensure every student gets a loan. But the payback, even if you've borrowed everything, is still very robust unless you decide that you don't want to work, in which case it becomes very difficult. But that would describe almost no one. So I think one of the reasons it's expensive is really that you're getting the opportunity to learn from some of the best in a very highly personalized environment. You're getting personalized career counselors that are helping you, giving you one-on-one support. You're studying at global institutions that are projecting their reputation and their programs all over the world. Every student that comes to Darden gets a global experience as part of the curriculum. Being a global business school, as we all are, it's not cheap. If you want to just be a local one and put every class online and have it scaled to millions of people, well, we can make it free. But that's not the same experience as getting out there and learning in an intimate environment with relatively small class sizes from some of the very smartest in the world. If you're a finance professor, you have a choice. You could go work for BlackRock on Wall Street, or you could come at Rochester or MIT or Darden and teach the next generation of leaders. You still have to allow someone to make a living. And that type of talent with PhDs, with often great work experience, you have to pay them a fair salary. And the market is competitive because they have real alternatives. Just like biotech professor or engineering or whatever, a neurosurgeon that's teaching at the medical school, well, gosh, they actually worked very hard to get where they are.
Indeed. Now, Amazon is now hiring 1,000 MBAs a year, which is hard to even imagine. McKinsey for years has hired 400, 500 plus every single year. Why do companies hire MBAs to begin with? Who wants to take that? Andrew?
I'll take it. So I think one of the big differences between an MBA and almost any other graduate program I can think of is that we care about experience. And I think that's just a fascinating idea. So you get an education, then you spend a few years in corporate America getting some experience, and then you come back and get an education that's relevant to that experience. And that's tremendously valuable to companies. And it's, again, part of why I think it's such a tremendous product. I'm a big advocate of what we do, and I think we add huge value to companies.
What do people learn in an MBA program? I mean, sure, they learn accounting, they learn finance, marketing, strategy, but what do they really learn? And I'm talking about the learning that occurs outside those core disciplines of what business really is.
Well, I think it depends on what the individual wants to learn, partly, but at Darden, you learn about honor. Exams are not proctored. You're on your honor to take it. You learn the power of teamwork. You learn how to solve problems. Every first year has to take Python and R and solve large data sets. So basically, you're incredible at solving problems. In our classroom, you also have to learn how to think on your feet and make decisions with incomplete information because we use the case method. And so it's a close proxy for what's needed in the business world. I spent 26 years of my career at McKinsey & Company and led all the talent development. And why does McKinsey hire MBAs? Why does all the top corporations that you can think of, Amazon, hire MBAs? Is because they can solve problems. They can work on teams. They can usually speak up, and they know how to solve across multiple industries and functions. So everything is a business. And there's no better preparation than combining what you might have learned undergraduate with the core business skills that You need to apply whether you're in academia, which is also just a not-for-profit, or whether you're in consulting, or whether you're running NASA.
The other thing you get, which I think is often underappreciated by people who are applying or thinking about an MBA and who haven't yet sampled it, is personal development. And I mean even beyond professional development. The kind of work that you do that makes you prepared for life and getting the best out of life. Jake, do you want to talk about what MIT does in that area?
Sure. So it's a very important area, the personal development. We want to make sure that people come in and by the time they graduate, it was a transformational experience. And that means not just taking accounting and marketing and strategy courses, as you said, but really understanding their weaknesses and strengths and how to build on the advising that we provide, the mentorship that we provide, helping them understand what industries might be attractive for them, where their strengths lie, and how to maybe address some of the weaknesses. And the weaknesses are addressed through some of the coursework. Their weaknesses are addressed through some peer-to-peer advising. So again, it's really a transformational experience. If you're coming in only for the accounting and marketing and strategy, I would tie it back to the original question of the price. I think if that's the reason you're paying the high tuition, and that's not probably worth it. But what is worth it is the transformation you make. And the companies see that, and that's why they're eager to hire these students.
Mm-hmm. Now, the vast majority of people who go to business school today go to switch careers. And they may switch a discipline, an industry, and a geographical location. They may do all three, which is a so-called triple jump. Why has the MBA been an effective tool to make that happen? Andrew?
Well, I think, and of course, your old school would contest this, but I think that one of the advantages is that we spend 2 years with them, which again is unusual about our program. Most master's programs are a one-year program, and we have the internship in the middle of that period. So if you're going to have this opportunity to change careers, I think having a little longer with the students, a little longer to bring them up to speed, perhaps on, I remember when I did my MBA, I'd never taken an economics class. So, having the opportunity to learn these new subjects a little slower, and that sort of taste test, if you will, in the middle of the program, I think is hugely useful as well with the internship.
Mm. I think everyone is a different human being, and they all have personalized aspirations, and that's certainly something I think we do with this generation, but it's not like people didn't have different aspirations in my class when I was in school either. It's just we talk about it more. We take the approach that everyone is a segment of one, and that everyone's aspirations are unique. And so before anyone even comes to Darden, we have a one-on-one with a career development counselor to try and understand what they're interested in. But also I think everything is a business. So you can come from anywhere. Like I was a kid, I grew up in Anchorage, Alaska, married a French girl, and then I went and lived half of my life in Belgium with a multinational career at McKinsey. And I would have never been able to do that without an MBA. I was just an electrical engineer that was getting more and more narrow, and I wanted to broaden my skill set. So I think the MBA is one of the few things that prepares you to work literally in any industry, in any corner of the world, because everything is a business. And that is why it is still one of the most relevant degrees you can possibly have. And you combine that with the personalization. Do I want to do a dual degree? This type of thing. Like we have 10 different dual degree options for students, and we see more and more students saying, I want to do the MBA, but I'd like to do that certificate, or I'd like to add this little thing on the side. I want to study in this country. And more that's becoming possible at the top schools.
So when you got your MBA in '89, MBA programs were a little bit different, I think. I think it's fair to say. I think they've evolved and changed dramatically since that time period. Let's talk a little bit about how the MBA has evolved and how it's changed and what employers are looking for today, perhaps more than they did back in the 80s. Jake?
So I think one way it's evolved and changed, and perhaps to some extent we're going back to the roots of MIT in this question, is it's become more practical, and we have more experiential learning. So the reason I say it's maybe going back to the roots of MIT is because in 1861, when the Institute was founded, it was founded to be different by William Barton Rogers with the motto of mens and manos, theory and practice. And what we're doing now, and I think other schools are doing that as well, is bringing in more experiential learning into the curriculum. So for example, at MIT, we have a rich portfolio of action learning courses which allow us to take the theory that the faculty, the Nobel laureates, the people we have on the faculty teach, but to take the theories and actually see their implementation in the real world by working on various projects. And that has changed. I see more and more of that. And again, I don't think it's unique to MIT anymore, but I am proud of the fact that to some extent, it's going back to how MIT was founded to be different.
Andrew?
Well, yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with Jake. That's definitely been, I think, the biggest push. And I think an important push. I think that we were a little too, it's interesting actually, because business schools, it's almost full circle. If you go back to the 50s and the 60s, business schools were actually in many senses much more practical. And then between the 60s and the 90s, we really developed the rigor of the way that we study subjects. Finance is an excellent example, actually, of an area that really benefited from that rigor. And we're sort of doing this full circle of saying, okay, that rigor is fantastic. We really do have brilliant faculty, all of us. And I think learning from those minds is incredible. But there needs to be that practical element. And adding the practical component. And the other really interesting thing is communications. So I'll try to tell a story as quickly as I can. At UCLA for a long time, we did some surveys of recruiters, and they said that our students weren't quantitative enough. So we added more and more quant content to our syllabus. And then a few years later, they interviewed again, weren't quant enough. And then a few years later, we added a communications class, and everybody said, your students have fantastic quant skills. So the communications is such an important part of what we do.
Yeah.
You know, John, I would say that on the one hand, we always talk about what's changed. There's also some components that are similar. You know, there's certain parts of business education that have not changed. For example, the core functions, finance, accounting, et cetera. That part has not really changed. The cases or the examples that you use, of course, are more modern and up to date all the time. If you take Darden and the experiential learning, we believe that the best experiential learning is through the case method because every single case is a real life example and we put you in the role of the CEO or the executive that has to make the decision. That's what you call experience-based learning. But if I would point to, besides those core elements that are kind of timeless but modernized as you go along, there are some things that are changing, and I would say that my observation is just the rise of tech and big data inside artificial intelligence and how that's impacting every business is definitely different than the 80s or whatever. I mean, every version, you know, in the 80s it was the rise of the personal computer, and then every decade has its version of it. But you know, we didn't have students programming in Python and R back in the 80s or in the 90s. Now that's kind of common core curriculum. Everybody is starting to weave that in. And also, if you look at what's popular with the students, it's true that consulting remains very popular in finance, and every school is the same. But the most popular club at Darden is the tech club. But it's just that tech is inside of everything.
Right.
What does it mean? There's tech consulting. There's ag tech, fintech, health tech, everything tech. Well, it's because it's in everything.
Right.
Ed tech. Who's not using technology?
In this last year, there's been a really interesting issue that has impacted many of the U.S. business schools. And it relates to a decline, significant in many cases, of international applicants. Part of this is attributed to all the anti-immigration rhetoric in the United States. Part of it is attributed to concern over getting a work visa, because many people who came here in the past and got an MBA sought work in the United States, and that has become much less certain. How are your schools dealing with that? Is it a problem? Is it something that's going to remain a problem? And what advice would you have for people out on our live stream who are in different countries considering coming to the United States for an MBA. Andrew, want to start?
Boy, you're lobbing me an easy one there.
Yeah.
Is perhaps look for an MBA that's STEM designated. So, no, this is a challenge in all seriousness, and we're very proud of the fact that we introduced the STEM designation. I think it helps our students, our foreign students, to have 3 years rather than 1 year of optional practical training. But I think the other thing more seriously to say to people is remember that this is not systemic, this is cyclical. And there's enormous pressure already from corporate America trying to get the people in the Senate and Congress to realize that what's made America great is our ability to steal the intellectual capital of the rest of the world. We've been very successful at it for 100 years, and it would be a very bad idea to turn that tap off. And I think businesses know this. Certainly the West Coast knows this. And that pressure will continue to be put on to really try to reverse some of these trends.
Scott, you think this is temporary?
I think it is cyclical. What's interesting is I think all three of us have foreign passports.
Yes, we do.
I'm a French citizen, you're Zimbabwean, I don't know what other citizenship you have. Israeli. So, my wife is not American, for example, and when we moved to University of Virginia, my wife had to go through the green card process, so I'm quite familiar with it in the recent administration because my wife got her green card within the last 12 months. And, so I understand the fear and the process that goes along with it. But what I would say is that there is some misinformation out there. I spent the summer traveling in Asia and Europe, meeting with students all over the place. And the gap between the reality and the perception is probably at an all-time high. Mm-hmm. And that gap is that the reality is better than the perception. The number of H-1 visas, I went to China and then I got all kinds of questions like, so how do you feel about the reduction in H-1 visas? And I said, but there is no reduction in H-1 visas. They have remained steady at 64, 65,000 for the last several years. There's no change. But the narrative is that it has changed. But it hasn't. It's that the number of applications is up. Well, the number of applications has always exceeded the supply of H-1 visas. So part of it is letting students know that, first of all, visas are still available to study in the United States. There's even a myth out there that you can't get a visa to enter the country. That we have not seen in reality. Maybe isolated examples may exist, but I've never seen it at Darden. And then in terms of students getting jobs, the reality is that a lot of international students are still getting jobs in this country. Not every single one. And by the way, we also encourage students to look outside of the United States. But what I would tell students that are living abroad is that it's still worthwhile to understand the United States culture. My own children had never lived in the United States until we came back, and they realized that it's a different culture, and that would be my same perspective is it's an economy worth getting to know, even if you're from abroad and you don't want to live in the US long term, come. And there are other levers to get a visa, one of which I know extremely well. It's called marriage. That lever worked incredibly well for me to get my French passport, and that continues to be a very attractive mechanism to immigrate to this country.
As Scott says, some people say that MBA means married but available, though.
Yeah, MBA.
There you go.
There you go, exactly. Jake, did you experience at MIT Sloan a decline in international applicants this past season?
We did,
Yep.
but I would second what was said. We actually saw an increase. So it did go down initially because of concerns, because of people not really understanding the realities, and again, having certain perceptions that were just not true. So the number of applications went down. However, we're seeing an increase. So I think it was temporary, and I think it's going back up, and I would agree with the comment that even if you're not necessarily intending on living in the U.S., coming and studying in the U.S., understanding this economy, understanding the importance of the U.S. in the world is very valuable.
Yes.
Another issue at business schools is the fact that unlike law and medicine, business schools in general have more difficulty attracting women, and fewer of them are at gender parity. In fact, incredibly few. What are your schools doing to address that issue, and is that a concern? Why, in fact, are business schools generally well below gender parity in relationship to law and medicine?
Well, I wouldn't say it's, I put it in the category of opportunity. It's just a matter of fact that it's not a gender parity in most schools. I think only USC and maybe one or two others are there. The way I view it is as follows. The majority of degree recipients undergraduate in the country are women. The majority of honors recipients undergraduate in the United States anyways, I can't speak for the world, are also women. Therefore, it's in our self-interest to attract our share of the talent into the business world. And for some reason, historically, women have not seen the MBA as the primary opportunity. There was a women's task force in business launched by President Obama that my predecessor started with some other deans, Dean Bruner, and then I had the concluding year. One of the conclusions of that was that women are deciding what to do a little bit earlier than the men. So one of the programs and insights that we came up with was a program where you can apply straight out of undergraduate and then defer your admission. We call it the Future Year Scholar Program. It's not unique. There are other schools that have something like that, but that is to address the opportunity that maybe some of the women are deciding a little bit younger, and I think that's fine. And that is a priority of ours, is just get into the conversation earlier. Long term, I would like to see Darden at gender parity, just because I think that mirrors the applicant, what the applicant pool should be and where the talent is.
Right. Andrew, you have a take on that?
You know, it's one thing that's been interesting for us to watch is we also have 4 full-time master's programs. And there we are at gender parity, which is really interesting. How do they differ? I think they differ in 2 things. First of all, they are more international. And the second is they tend to be slightly younger. I think that the sort of jury is out on exactly which one of those really has the bigger effect. There has been an argument that the fact that we require this experiment may have deterred some women thinking of doing an MBA. And I hope that, you know, as increasingly corporate America has realized the cost of not helping women to be able to keep their careers going, as they start thinking about raising families and starting that part of their lives, I think hopefully that's going to help us begin to, because really this is a partnership between business schools and corporate America. And we both need to get our pieces right to be able to bring that more to parity.
What do business schools today?
Maybe just
go ahead, Jake.
the one thing that I would look at is also the positive, that the trend is going in the right direction.
Absolutely.
So if you look at the past 10 years, and I've experienced this both at INSEAD as well as at MIT, we're not at gender parity yet, and I would underline the word yet. But if you look at the past 10 years, I think most schools have seen an increase in number of women in the programs. The percentage has gone up. At MIT now it's at 44%. 10 years ago we were at 34%. And again, I think most schools are seeing increase in female representation in their MBA class. So I think that's very good. So the trend has been quite strong towards gender parity, and we'll get there. And I think it will happen, you know, in the next few years.
Yeah, the trend is good. And the other part of the trend, besides on the intake side, and I don't know if you guys experience the same, but we find that the women have incredible success getting jobs. They are actually they're much sought after, and their statistics are every bit as good, if not better, than the guys in terms of when they're getting jobs, percentage of people getting jobs, when they're getting them, et cetera. I mean, the trends are also very good in that, on the outplacement side as well. So there's good trends on.
And they're also getting a lot of scholarship money because as schools try to push the numbers up, more money is going that way.
That's right.
And it's also around URMs, underrepresented minorities, and other groups that we want to increase.
Yeah, Scott's right about the salary data. We had, I mean, on average, our women actually had better salaries this last year than men. That's fantastic.
Is that right?
And again, that's not really thanks to us. That's thanks to corporate America. It's that partnership. So I think things are changing.
Okay, I'm going to open it up for questions from the audience. Just want to ask one more question. Where can business schools improve? Okay, I mean, there's been tremendous efforts to globalize schools in the 90s primarily. There's been a great emphasis on experiential learning, as you pointed out earlier, and data analytics. On the personal development side, smoothing off the rough edges of people who come in and make them more effective in the world of work. But is there a place that still remains where business schools still can improve on one level of preparing candidates for work? Jake?
I think the way we can maybe improve is to, again, think about the technology and the way technology has changed things. So what we're doing at MIT is looking at MicroMasters and thinking about how we can use technology and leverage technology and bring to the residential experience some of online hybrid type of education. And again, I think that would help the students. It would allow us to engage with more people. But again, you're seeing change, you're seeing movement in online, you're seeing blended learnings, you're seeing MicroMasters, you're seeing really a major change and a disruption taking place because of technology in education as well. So I think we can learn from that, see what works, and experiment and try to build on it.
Scott, what do you think?
Look, the way I view it is you can always improve in everything. As soon as you start to say that you can no longer improve, your demise is imminent. So I believe that there's always things you can try and do better. There are areas where maybe the total percentage of change might be higher, and I would agree that the technology-enabled learning, asynchronous learning, synchronous learning has great promise for delivering content just in time, flipping the classroom. We do a lot of that already, but we're just getting started with that. I mean, imagine where society will be 10 to 20 years from now with Moore's Law even roughly holding. Imagine Siri being 1,000,000 times better. That would be in about 20 years, so that type of speech interpretation. So there's just a lot that schools can do better. We can raise more money. We can make it more affordable. We can be as good in the virtual classroom as we are in the physical classroom. We can update the cases. We can make them more diverse, more global, more modern, more just in time to reflect the current society. You can take students to places that they've never been before, more and more. You can make your classrooms even more diverse, and so on. But I think it's always there's a combination of incremental improvements, and I think all of us are trying to improve our schools every day. And then there's the real disruptors, and I think technology clearly is the one that has the most promise for disruption to also, I would say, lower opportunity cost. You can imagine a world where the total number of months spent in person over time may diminish. I would put forward the hypothesis, the residential program will always have its place as the high-end version. It's just not ever going to be the same if you're just sitting with a headset and a screen in your bedroom in your pajamas. It's just never going to be the same as having a real-life in-person experience. But on the other hand, there's in-betweens, the hybrid part, and that's, I think, where we're seeing more rapid improvement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Andrew?
Absolutely. Well, I don't want to sound like a Luddite, but the one thing I would say is, I hope that we don't. The fear I have of being overly concerned about change is moving away from what I think is an excellent basic product. And again, just stepping back to this idea that during the 80s and the 90s, we really did add huge intellectual content to the business programs. And I think that continues to add a huge amount of value to our students. So one thing that concerns me is, as we start to try to add more and more different content to our program, we step away more and more from that rigorous learning that I think is such an important part of the MBA. So, yeah, it's a bit of a cautionary tale, but I just hope we don't change too much.
I think you're right. If I reflect upon when I got to Darden, which is about 3 years ago, just over 3 years ago, having come from McKinsey & Company, I think everybody thought I'm just going to try and change everything. That's kind of the fear, bring in the consultant that's going to just blow up everything. And to be honest, the first thing I started with is, well, what am I really not going to try and change? And one of the things I'm not trying to change is the quality of the teaching in the classroom at Darden, because it's always been a hallmark. I mean, we've been ranked top of the world for many, many years. Who am I to tell the faculty that's been ranked #1 for teaching that they should do it better? I think they themselves have the drive to try and innovate. So I think it's important to what you're saying is not everything has to change. It's more just being on your game. I'm a tennis player, so I'm always thinking about, was racket technology a little bit better? Would Federer do better if we switch back to the wood racket? I think actually the newer rackets are a little bit better. But there's some things that endure. Mm-hmm. And there's no reason to change the core of a case discussion. Professors that have great knowledge in a given area, you don't need to switch them out just to say, hey, I got a new professor in here, let's get rid of the Nobel Prize winner and bring in another one. I mean, why would you do that, right? Yeah. On the other hand, I think we need to be always on our toes and humble and listen to what the students need and evolve accordingly.
Right. Great. Okay, out there, let's see. Anyone have a question? Do we have a mic out there? Oh yeah, we do. So there's a microphone.
Here.
Okay. Why don't you get up, tell us who you are, and shoot.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Hello, my name is Sapna Patel. I graduated Master's in Biomedical Engineer. I'm currently preparing for dental school and MBA adult degree. My question is, what are some challenges you have faced during your MBA program?
Okay, so what are the challenges a typical student would face in an MBA program, particularly one who comes from a very specialized field like engineering? Yeah.
I'll take that. So that reminds me of a conversation I had actually with a MIT undergrad that was, I think, aerospace engineering and was wondering something similar. Should I come to Darden or should I go to a different environment? And
Should come to MIT.
Yeah, maybe she was looking at it. The thing is, it's what skill set do you think you need to work on? So in this case, it was a rather introverted person that was very familiar with solving equations that had a fixed outcome. Mm-hmm. And I would say that, what an MBA can do for someone like that is, especially if you include the case method, is give that person more self-confidence on how to speak up and how to make decisions with incomplete information. Having been an engineer myself, you tend to believe that the world can be solved with actual numbers down to a defined result that's black and white. But actually business is incredibly gray in many regards. Like, what is exactly the right thing to do? There is no the idea of perfect information, assume a perfect market. Perfect markets don't exist. It's because they're full of human beings which are totally imperfect. So I think the one thing that an engineer can get out of an MBA education is also learning how to work through teams, how to communicate. If they're an introvert, learn how to speak up in a larger setting, how to think on their feet and give answers that do not require perfect information, because I would say even out of McKinsey, where we would analyze things to death, the answer was not always perfection in terms of the data. The data was not always the only thing that dictated the right answer.
Right. Anyone else out there?
Yeah.
Oh, we got it. Oh, here we go.
Hi, my name is Joseph Puthamana. I work at a fintech in New York. I have an accounting and econ background, and I'm just curious. I went to a big state school, and I never saw the dean come admissions process. They gave me a letter and saying you're admitted. What is your impact on the applicant? And I just want to know how that process works.
Okay. So, you may have heard from the admissions directors, but from the standpoint of a dean, how do you think about applicants in the process of selection in business schools? Is it fair? Is it decent? Is it reliable? Is it a crapshoot? Andrew?
Yeah, I'll take that. I think one of the main things any manager has to do is pick talent. So my main job is not to tinker with the admissions process at all. So having and I think we have a fantastic one. Rebecca Lewin's just amazing. Having a very strong head of admissions, that's my main task. And then to give them very broad parameters. And then really, most admissions teams are so on the road. They're so in the details. They're meeting the applicants. They're talking to the applicants. And they get a very personal sense of what the applicants look like. So for deans to start meddling with that stuff, I think is a little dangerous. And I tend to keep out of it, other than the very high-level stuff of saying, let's care about certain things. Consortium is extremely important for us, for example, at Simon. Diversity is very important. Let's set the high-level stuff and then let the admissions team do their job.
Jake, you have a point of view on
I would second
on that?
exactly what was said. So the goal is to find a great team, and we have a fabulous team in admissions. They know what they're doing. Overall, they're able to select classes every year that are truly amazing people. And as was said, the goal is to just make sure you have a strong team with a great leader who can be attuned to students' interests, to understand the faculty strengths, to understand the institute's leadership, and let them do their thing, which they do quite well.
Yeah.
Of course, one issue is at every school, GMATs have been going up higher and higher, even in the face of application declines. Is that a dean's issue?
It's a dean's issue in the sense that you have to figure out what are the markers of success for an incoming class. If you just want the GMAT, then you just can have a computer select your class. You don't need any human being to do it. You just take the highest. Quite frankly, I don't think that's a good way to pick a class at all. And I think the GMAT is just one way to think about a candidate's profile. And there's many more criteria that determine success in the business world beyond your GMAT. You may have had a bad day. You may be sick. Maybe you didn't have the financial resources to study for it. It's, in my opinion, above a certain threshold level, it has no indication as to whether or not you'll be successful. There are other things. You know, for me, it's about figuring out what is the broad set of parameters you're looking for to mirror, call it an academical or global village that you want to put the students in front of, that they can simulate the real business environment in their classroom. If it's just take the highest GMAT scores, that's a very boring way to do it, and you will not get a simulation of reality of what the real business world is like, and I don't think you'll have the best classroom. So, you know, I view the role of a dean in the admissions is beyond setting parameters and challenging norms. I think for me, I do allow the admissions team to decide who to select. I love my admissions team led by Donna Clark, and I let them choose the applicants. On the other hand, I believe it's my role to get out there and meet the students firsthand. So I meet a lot of students all over the world, and I view my role as to be transparent about what the school is trying to do, what the vision is, and to take the questions so they can hear it straight from the top. And also when they're at Darden, I view my role as also hearing directly from the students. After all, they're the ones that are, let's say, consuming the product that we have to offer. And I want to hear it directly from the students, not filtered by 3 or 4 layers of people that only want to let the good information go to the top. So, you know, I think the dean can play a good role in answering questions, demystifying what the school cares about, what the priorities of the school about. And I always find when I speak directly to the students, I also get a much better sense of what we need to be working on.
Right. Okay, maybe time for one more question, and then we'll start the meet and greet. There's someone on the right side here.
In the middle here.
Oh, in the middle, yeah. Why don't you come to the mic? Actually, I can hear you, and I can hear you quite well.
My name is Laura Jimenez. I am currently an intern partner at Yale University, shifting or trying to shift careers to low-income markets. And I'm going to point a little bit of your questions around the value of an MBA and also how it has evolved. My question is more about timing and ROI, or time value of money. So when you think about how the MBA has shifted to what is today, how do you think it'll go in the future? So as we think about emerging markets, how the market will influence the core curriculum
Yeah, so what will the MBA look like 10 years from now? Will MBAs be replaced by robots? Will the next recession wipe out the demand for MBAs? What does a degree look like 10 years from now in terms of what you think you might be teaching and what the market that you send your product into will look like? Scott?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Jake?
Sure. I think one big change that is taking place is around data. So what we're seeing is more demand from companies, McKinsey and others, for students who understand big data, its implications, and how to use it and communicate it well to various stakeholders. So I think you will see that continue. So it started a few years ago, and probably in 10 years, we're going to see more focus on business analytics, marketing analytics, just using the volume of data to make decisions. So it's really what we refer to as taking the right data through the right models to make decisions that create value. And that will come into the MBA program a little more.
Andrew?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, you know, this idea, I love the idea of a robot taking over an MBA's job. It's just not going to happen. And I think, you know, one of the things Scott was talking about.
I mean, a lot of lawyers have been replaced by artificial intelligence already. Why is that not going to happen in the MBA market?
So that's a great example, right? So the legal profession, I think, really is driven by, and in fact, so is finance, driven by sort of an iterative and an easily, in a sense, computerized set of processes. But, you know, Scott was talking about the value of cases, for example, and the value of this idea that many business decisions, it's not a 1 or a 0. It's not an equation. And you don't have sufficient information to make a decision, but you've got to make a decision anyway. And I think that's what we're good at doing at business schools. The case study, I think, this case study method, I think, is a wonderful thing. And it's going to be a long time before a neural net knows how to answer a case study. And that's wonderful. That's a great opportunity for all of the students.
You know, I would have a few reflections on your question. I mean, one is I believe that the role of emotional intelligence is going to rise. In a world where computers will have more of the facts and figures and can do just raw crunching, it means that the differentiator for humans is going to be emotional intelligence, where I believe we will have a greater emotional intelligence than computers for a longer period of time than on the IQ side. And learning how to learn is going to become one of the core skills, because the world is evolving and technology is changing at unprecedented rates. There's no period in the history of the world where there's been such information creation at an exponential rate for 30 years or 40 years. It's never happened before. So learning how to learn, lots of jobs and industries are being recreated in ways that we would never be able to predict. So in a world where there's great uncertainty and volatility, which we certainly have, and you also can apply that to the career environment. So your careers are highly uncertain. What will the consulting industry profession look like in 25 years? Who knows, right? You can postulate all kinds of different things. What will banking look like, and so forth? Well, what we know in that environment is that the creation of options for yourself, stock options, go up in value when there's higher uncertainty and there's more volatility. That is certainly the case with your career. And that means that the value of an MBA, which creates, it's one of the ultimate option value creators, because not only do you learn different functional skills that allow you to work in different functions, but it also, if you've gone to the right place, it teaches you how to learn throughout your life, how to recreate yourself. And I believe the role of the top business schools will be to have a lifelong learning relationship with their alumni that does not end with the 2-year program. It will be continuing through lifelong learning, executive education, different forms of learning where you will keep coming back to your alma maters to learn. And in that regard, I believe the MBA will rise to more relevance than ever before. And I would also say, and I talked about this in one of my graduation speeches that you can see on YouTube if you're interested. I think the ROI metric alone is very overrated. I believe it's too narrow, and I believe it's too short term. You know, you think about your life, you'll probably work till at least 70. In Australia, the legal retirement age today, right now, is 70 years old. So the idea that you might work 45 more years is probably very likely if you can stay healthy. In that context, it's your terminal value that matters much more than your short term, like what did I earn the year I get out. 50% of people change their jobs within 2 or 3 years anyways. You go to McKinsey, 50% of the people leave within 3 years, so they're going to do something else. In that context, it's what I call the return on your why, W-H-Y. What is the purpose in your life that you want to have? What is the way that you want to make a difference in the world? And how will the MBA prepare you to pursue that passion that you have? Yes, you can measure some of it in dollars and cents, but not only. Because if you only measure your life in dollars and cents, I guarantee you by the end of your life, you probably won't be a happy person.
Well, that's a good way to end it. Let me thank Andrew, Jake, and Scott for joining me this afternoon, and I want to thank all of you for being engaged. Let me also say that all 3 deans are going to be downstairs and are happy to engage with you on any other questions you might have. Go down there, meet the schools, ask smart questions. Try to get as much information as you can to make the most informed decision you can make about your business school choice. So thanks for coming.
Thank you.